Board of Directors and audience, I'm very pleased to introduce our two new assistant principals at Steilacoom High School tonight. Come on up, you guys. This is Tracy Garza and Charlie Highland. Tracy is joining us from Kentwood High School, where she was an assistant principal for 5 years. She's going to be in charge of our athletics department in addition to many other things at our school. And Charlie comes to us from Bethel Middle School, where he was an associate administrator for 1 year, and before that, a CTE teacher and ASB director at Bonnie Lake High School. I'd like to share with you that it was a very thorough, comprehensive process. We had over 30 plus qualified applicants, and as soon as we got into the interview process, in my eyes and in the panel's eyes, it was very clear who our top candidates were. So as you get to know them and get to know their work ethic and their personal values, I think you're really going to enjoy what they bring to our district and how they help us continue to move forward.
Great.
Excited to join the team. Very excited.
Okay, thank you, Jake. Appreciate it. Look forward to having you on board for this coming year and for a long time.
Welcome.
Jake?
Congratulations.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Jake.
Okay, before we get started on the comments from the audience part of the agenda, I just want to let everybody know that we are trying something new this evening, and we have a webcam set up over there, and we're streaming this as a webinar. The PA system is tied into the computer as a line in, so that anyone who has joined us remotely, either with a call in to the webinar or actually zoomed in, through the web, should be able to see and hear everything that's going on, and it should make the audio recording for the Zoom portion of the webinar as good a quality as the audio recording we have for the permanent official digital record. So when you, as we come up for the comments, when you do come up to the microphone too, please speak into the microphone so that all of your comments are heard. So at this time, let's move to our comments from the audience portion of our meeting. I would like to remind everyone, the members of the audience have this opportunity to have 3 minutes to comment to the board on anything that's on the agenda or not on the agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Kind of the rules of the game are you can criticize the board, you can criticize the superintendent, but please do not criticize individual staff members and so forth. You're also welcome to say thank you to board members or staff if you'd like to point people out that you really appreciate what they've done. So when you come to the microphone, please state your name clearly and your address. That's all I ask. So Scarlett Shepard, you're first on the list.
I'm Scarlett Shepard, and my address is 11415 Mill Place, Anderson Island, 98303. So, thank you. So, thank you for having the wonderful opportunity to be here in person to speak with you. I'm a proud parent of Anderson Island Elementary, of my daughter, and I'm also part of a really committed group of parents, residents, and we really want to advocate to return 4th and 5th grade back to Anderson Island Elementary. And we're really urging you to do this right away. It's very urgent. And much of my testimony today is really a lot of these issues I've already shared with you and the board and various coffee chats throughout the school year from 2022 to 2023. And what I really think here is that, we're sharing our concerns about long, stressful commutes, interfering with kids' learning and putting safety and well-being at risk. And it's really time to make a change. And these are the following ways that our district right now is putting our kids at risk. Separating small children, right, from their parents, educators, and caregivers, and from their home for 10-hour school day. That is really unacceptable. Including 90 minutes or more, commuting each way, multiple buses and ferry is unacceptable. We've got to find solutions and do something different, because right now, what we're doing is not working. And also, the ferry, has a lot of issues right now. And due to the unreliability of the ferry, kids are at risk every day with extreme transportation delays, being stranded, which extends their daily commute. And at times, they're late to school. They cannot even sometimes attend school at all. And it has become a barrier, a real barrier for accessing education on island for our kids. And it's unacceptable. We've got to do something different. And parents, we've shared with the board leadership and school about how our children are suffering unnecessarily through long days commuting in an environment that is detrimental to their social and emotional well-being and learning, and in an environment that is not developmentally appropriate setting for our elementary kids, which puts their education and their safety at risk every single day. And our kids have to go through it, and the parents have to go through it. So my final comment is we need to work together to bring back 4th and 5th grade to Anderson Island Elementary, fall 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person who has signed up is Savannah David.
Hi, it's Susanna David, and
Susanna, thank you for correcting.
I live at 10620 Olympic Place on Anderson Island. My husband and I have lived on Anderson Island for 17 years this summer, and we love it out there. It's a wonderful community. It's a wonderful place to raise kids. It can be difficult for families to stick around Anderson Island because of a number of reasons, but one of the big reasons is that once, especially lately, last 2-3 years, once the children become 4th grade, then a lot of difficult choices need to be made. Families pull their kids out of the district. Families move off island because they just can't see putting their kids through these 10-hour days. And so, as you know, the school is there because of its remote and necessary status in the Washington Administrative Code. And there are other schools that have the same status, maybe 10 or so throughout the state. And in looking into this, I've learned that sometimes there's K through 8, in one room, which might not be ideal in some people's minds, but if there's only, say, 10 students, they work it out, with one teacher and like one teaching assistant. So I really appreciate how the board has been amenable to bringing the 4th and 5th grade back, like for example in the discussion about the bond, which didn't pass, adding even a new building as well as another teacher. And it seems like in our recent conversations, the board has been agreeable to bringing the 4th and 5th grade back. And I appreciate that. I guess what I want to say is, I don't think it's strictly necessary to have an additional certificated teacher come. It would be nice, it would be great, but it would really only be for about 4 or 5 students, which, as we know on the mainland, I think the student-teacher ratio is like 25 to 1 or something like that. So I don't see it as necessary to have a new full-time teacher come for us to do this. We have excellent para-educators. Unfortunately, 2 of them, due to budget cuts, are not at our school this year, which is very sad and frustrating because they're really excellent. But we still have 1 really wonderful para-educator left who does amazing work in the classroom. And so, in my opinion, we can bring the 4th and 5th grade back even without an additional full-time teacher, just with the assistance of the paraeducator. So, Scarlett has discussed, and of course, it's been shared with the board multiple times, all the reasons why we want the 4th and 5th grade back. It's the 10-hour day. It's the learning loss that comes with the boat being canceled sometimes.
Maybe point of time.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Okay, Mr. Bungert, you're up next, sir.
Good evening. David Bungert, 2702 MacArthur Street, Yukon, Washington. I'd like to talk about the enrichment levy, the capital levy, and the new business. At last month's board meeting, Mr. Lewis said this school district is the anomaly when it comes to financing using levies. You really have to change your ideology. You need to, it's too late now, you have to have it all in by August 1st, but you need to have a technology, academic, and athletics. You are putting technology in this capital levy for buildings, but that's not effective. By creating enrichment levies, you will free up funds for the EPO. Okay? How many para-educators can you hire for your SRO? Most school districts are financing, the SRO is a service. It's not an employee. Most of them are financing through an enrichment levy. You could hire all kinds of para-educators. You could hire a teacher. You have to change your mindset. Unfortunately, the building capital levy, the majority of it is to pay for a bad decision with debt. So, please sell the McNeil site. The Manchester site is acceptable. Take the $4 million, if the capital levy passes, and start building classrooms at Cherrydale and Chloe Clark. And I don't know how long you're going to go, 4 years, 6 years. You could actually, if you do it right, you could probably add 10 to 12 classrooms, not modules, classrooms. So, a bunch of the community got together. We drank. We drank some more. I've been nominated. If you present any future bonds to build on the McNeil site, I will be the chair for the Dense Committee. You won't have a problem finding one. Thank you.
Chris Weber. Next person is Samantha Music Siridakis. How close did I get?
You're pretty good.
Hi. Hello. My address is 11824 Lake Florence Drive, Anderson Island, Washington, 98303. First off, I would like to thank all of you for taking the time to listen to our urgent concerns for change at Anderson Island Elementary. I'm also part of a group of committed residents and parents that want change for Anderson Island Elementary and a return to offering 4th and 5th grade. I've seen the school blossom over the years with our staff and unmatchable island community that supports our students and our school. And we've been able to fill the gaps. The students that live on Anderson Island should be offered the same education and resources from Steilacoom School District as the students that live off island. We have amazing, versatile teachers and staff. Our current teachers have been teaching multiple grades in the same classrooms for years. It's obvious that extending school to 4th and 5th grade would require an additional staff and reconfiguration of the space we currently have or another space. I personally have 4 young children who will hopefully be able to stay in the Steilacoom School District. However, like a lot of parents, I am probably going to have to homeschool my kids if it is not extended to the 4th and 5th grade. And just to have them, out away from anyone they really know for 10 hours a day is hard for adults, and it's hard to commute for adults, and even when you're in middle school and high school. And I've lived on Anderson Island for 27 years. I also went to Anderson Island Elementary as a student and all through the Steilacoom School District. And I would really like my kids to stay in this district, but I feel like Anderson Island's kind of been ignored and just treated like, we're just out there. And we are out there, but we are still in the school district and we still should be treated equally. And if Ferry is having problems, which it often does,
there should be something put into place where what is going to happen for our kids. If that needs to be raised by parents or money from us, we need to know where are they going to go? Salters with no snacks? Because they're scared and they don't know where to go. And, you know, how long is this going to be until it's resolved? We don't know. We can't rely on the ferry. Hopefully we got a boat or somebody to pick them up. But I'm scared to have my kids out there. I used to be out there, but it was a different world then. And I hope that you guys just put yourself in our shoes for a minute and consider our request and bring back 4th and 5th grade. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, at this time, in the comments from the audience, I do want to acknowledge that since Friday, July 7th, the board and the superintendent received 11 emails from residents advocating the returning of 4th and 5th grade to Anderson Island Elementary. And for the record, we received emails from Jessica Kinsey, Cindy Hardcastle, Mandrake Firm Holmquist, Mariah Wargaki, Sarah Palmer, Sarah Leaf, Melissa Miller, Susan Wallingford, Tiffany Wagner, Samantha Music, and Scarlett Shepard. For the record, I want to acknowledge that we received this correspondence and think it is most appropriate to acknowledge them at this point, the comments from the audience point in our meeting. On the advice of council for the time period that we received these emails, we have not responded to them as the advocates for the 4th and 5th grades to return to Anderson Island have engaged counsel. That's the Johnson George LLP law firm on their behalf. But we do have them, and they are part of the record. All right, so at this time, it is now 6:18, and so we need to recess to a public hearing on the 2023-24 budget year forecast.
Too many technology buttons. Good evening, Chair Scott, members of the board. Tonight, we're going to provide a public hearing related to the 23-24 general fund and all other fund budgets. This is hopefully the last stop of many stops that you've been on as we've developed the 23-24 budget. As you know, we provided a public hearing opportunity last month. This is the second public hearing opportunity, and later tonight you'll be considering a resolution to adopt the budget. The information provided right now as background is information directly from the budget that's been posted to the website, that has been advertised in the News Tribune for the last 2 consecutive weeks, and that has been available at the district office for review. Difficult for all of you probably to see. I probably should have brought all my notes all ready to go. All of the budget funds have been presented in the F-195 document. This page is the overall summary of each one of the funds. It provides the appropriation level in the general fund, ASB fund, debt service fund, capital projects fund, and transportation vehicle fund. It also authorizes excess levies of $9.6 million in the general fund. That is your enrichment levy that was passed by voters in a previous year. This is the maximum dollar amount. We are capped based on a maximum dollar amount per $1,000 of assessed valuation. We're also capped based on a per student. We are not at the maximum level. We are approaching the maximum level, but we are capped at the greater of those maximum levels in statute or the amounts that voters passed. And the voters passed the maximum level of $9.6 million for the next calendar year. That is what's included in this budget document. The enrollment estimates for next year essentially are even with this current year. If you were to take a look at each one of the classes in the current year actuals, you would see next year's estimates for second grade are essentially this year's first graders. And we roll up each year pretty close based on a demographer's estimate typically. The demographer's estimate would have us go up about 100 students. We chose not to utilize the demographer estimate as we did last year because, as you know, we did not see the increase that demographers estimated. Instead, this year we went even and predicted a small decrease in the kindergarten numbers. Yeah. So we're down. We are predicting a lower enrollment next year than we had this year. Hopefully we'll be even or up, and if we are, we'll have the opportunity to get a little more revenue and possibly hire staff if they all come in third grade, for instance. We'll exceed our class size capacities in third grade and we'll have to hire a third grade teacher. But right now, based on the enrollments that we see today, we think these estimates are appropriate and conservative for you to be able to move forward. This next slide is not from the budget document. It's a summary of the budget document. It provides a pie chart of both the expenditures by object, meaning certificated salaries or the salaries of teachers and counselors, speech language pathologists, principals, the superintendent. They fall within the certificated salaries. There's classified salaries. That's pretty much everybody else. Contractual services or purchase services. Those include transportation. We contract entirely for our transportation costs. It also includes food service. That's the one difference that you'll see if you compare our numbers with other like-sized districts. We are one of the few districts that contract out both food service and transportation services. So our classified expenditures are typically a little lower than districts, other districts our size, and our contracted costs are higher than other districts our size. And then the balance of those expenditures that you'll see there are for capital outlay and for, I think benefits is included in there, which is, over the last 20 years, that benefits number has just gone higher and higher and higher, and it's typically due to pension costs and healthcare costs. So, which we are really outside of our control. The only control we have related to those benefit costs are how many employees we hire. On the revenue side, it's by source, which is levy, state funding, federal funding, and other local resources. And the biggest part of that is our general fund, state resources, both state general and state specific. So state general is the amount that's generated specifically based on the number of students we have, and state specific would be things like special ed grant, learning assistance program grant, or the LAP grant, multi-language learner grants, all of those specific grants that are targeted for specific purposes. Those state funds make up the vast majority of our funds. Levy funds, the second biggest category. Federal funds comes in third if you think of local, state, and federal. We have the most number of requirements and spend the greatest amount of time dealing with federal requirements, and they provide the least amount of resources. That might have been not entirely a fact-based comment. It is an opinion-based comment. They get too little resources for the amount of money they provide us. The debt service fund budget. This is the budget that that captures all of the payments for bonds. It also captures all of the receipts for for property taxes that are collected for bonds. This is the last year we'll be collecting money from taxpayers for bond payment, and it will pay off the bonds. So you'll see we're collecting significantly less money than the amount we're spending, but that's because at the end of the year we'll have a lot of money sitting in the bank ready to pay off the bonds at the end of this calendar year. So at the end of the year, we will end with under $1 million in our debt service fund, and some of that money is allowable to be paid for non-voted debt, or the $4 million we borrowed for the McNeil Street property, and some of that will just be held to pay for startup costs associated with the next bond. But it also, if the board decided not to move forward in the next several years with a bond, that money would be refunded to taxpayers. The ASB budget captures the amount of money that is collected and distributed by associated student bodies in all of our schools, high school, middle school, and all of the elementary schools. So there's multiple processes for approval of those budgets. They're approved by students first, and then they are all combined in one fund budget, and they are brought to you for approval of those overall dollar amounts. Typically, we have an interest in making sure that the amounts collected are fully spent to the benefit of those students in a relatively fast time frame. It's not always in the exact year, but it typically can be in the next couple of years after collection. The capital budget, you'll see that's much slimmer than you've seen in the past. The capital budget next year is going to be collecting primarily impact fees. That's the revenue that you see posted. And all of that money is transferred in the budget to the debt service fund for payment of the $4 million debt for the payments over the next 5 years. So we're collecting impact fees to pay for the land, to pay for growth. There's a combination of transfers from the general fund and the capital projects fund to address the debt. If a capital levy that you'll discuss later passes, then these transfers would no longer be required. But right now we haven't passed a capital levy, and I've included them so that in the event the capital levy is not adopted by you or passed by the voters, we have capacity to be able to pay the debt that has been incurred and restructured. Something that hasn't been covered in prior meetings is our 4-year outlook. So as part of the budget document and the budget resolution, you adopt a 4-year outlook. What I have done is put together a 4-year outlook that includes an increase in the levy resources consistent with what voters have approved, and I've added a 4th year that voters have not yet approved and assumed the same level of funding in the 4th year that voters approved in the 3rd year. So you'll see a pretty significant increase in local resources over the next couple years. You'll remember that voters approved a 4-year levy that included an increase. That was offset by a decrease in the debt service payments or our bond payments to ensure that there's no increase in overall taxpayer rate. But we'll see an increase in the levy resources. I estimated a 3% increase year over year in state resources, no percentage increase in federal resources. So I'm making a relatively conservative assumption in all of these areas. The 3% increase in state resources includes both enrollment growth, and it includes what would be typically a COLA or cost of living adjustment that's provided by the state. On the expenditure side, I've made assumptions associated with 3% increase in overall expenditures year over that 4-year period. We will likely experience inflation that may, in individual years, exceed that 3% target. But what that means is we'll have to make decisions to make reductions in other areas to offset any increases that are in excess of 3%. So if, for instance, insurance costs are 20% more, we will have to find reductions in other areas to hit that 3% overall expenditure target. With those assumptions, you can see that we would project that over that 4-year period, we would get back to a 6% ending fund balance, 6% of expenditures, or consistent with policy 6022, the minimum fund balance policy. I had hoped that we could do it in 2 years, but looking at a 4-year outlook, we still may be able to do it in a shorter amount of time, but using conservative revenue and expenditure numbers over a 4-year period gives us more flexibility to move forward. And if we get additional resources in the interim or find additional savings, we'll be able to add to that fund balance in years 2 and 3 and potentially hit those targets earlier. And I covered that. I also wanted to include the financial indicators from OSPI. So what I did was made the assumptions from the F195F. I projected ending fund balances, average cash balances, the amount of money that would be collected over expenditures, and used that information to determine where we would be on the OSPI financial health indicator outlook. And you can see by the 4th year, we end up at a 3.0, which is not a 4, but it's probably as high as the district is going to get without socking away a ton of fund balance, far in excess of your fund balance policy. You would likely need to advise us to change policy in order to hit a better target. That concludes the presentation of both the budget and the 4-year outlook. I'm happy to answer any questions about the details. I did bring all of the budget and the backup documentation. I just hope you don't make me use it.
Let me, Victor, do you have any questions or comments for Mr. Lewis?
Oh, no, I do not.
Okay, thank you, sir. Jen?
I have a question just regarding the 4-year projection. What is, oh, sorry, thank you. What is the estimation each year for growth for FTEs that's kind of built into this?
Sorry.
3%.
Not for enrollment. The overall expenditures and the revenue are both targeted at 3%. So the percentage varies from year to year. There are enrollment bubbles that flow through. So sometimes you have a big year move out and there's a high birth year. So it's not a consistent percentage each year, but we are projecting a small amount of growth each year. You can see the, I'll pull that information out. We've got from 23-24 to 24-25, we are projecting a small decrease because we've got enrollment bubble exiting, and then we have increases of about 15 students from 24-25 to 25-26, and then 10 students from 25-26 to 26-27. Again, if I'm looking at the demographer data that we've been provided, these are very conservative increases compared to what the demographers would suggest. As I think I told you at the last meeting, I'm uncomfortable relying on demographer data given the last 3 years. I'm much more comfortable utilizing a cohort roll-up number for at least the next 3 years until we actually see a pattern develop in our data. Right now, there's not a pattern, and it's difficult to make a prediction using the rearview mirror. So, doing the best we can with enrollment given an uncertain future.
I have a question for you, Sean. That are other school districts similarly projecting their enrollments that because it's been really strange after COVID. You know, the students have left, and I'm just wondering if you talk to other people in your position that in neighboring school districts, are they feeling the same anxiety for the students' growth over the next few years?
I don't know if they're feeling the same anxiety. I'm feeling a lot of anxiety. So, and part of that is the combination of the unpredictability, what I would say is the unpredictability of enrollment combined with our very low fund balance. That's what causes me to be anxious. Most other districts right now are very concerned about enrollment projections, but not all of them have the same low level of fund balance that we're walking into next year. So they may have some capacity to weather a 100 FTE reduction. We, at this point, have very little capacity to be able to weather that kind of miss, which is why we are projecting probably lower than what many other districts in our similar situation would be.
You're being more conservative on the FTE projections than you would otherwise be.
I have a question about the expenditures and the assumption of 3% expenditures. Are you comfortable with that and are you comfortable with that assumption? I assume you are because you put it in the budget. But the question of inflation and costs that might come up that maybe we're not thinking about, I'm a little bit kind of like, ugh. And then I'm also wondering, is that based on the assumption of the same sort of budget that we've adopted now with all of the cuts that we've included? Like, you have not increased spending. It's sort of like we're staying static with our costs and the cuts that we have through those next few years, and then that 3% expenditure estimate. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
So if you're asking whether I believe in inflation within the K-12 realm will be at 3% over the next 4 years, the answer is no, I don't believe that. I think it's going to be higher than that. I think one of the interests that I heard from the board, and certainly the superintendent, is that we wanted to be able to get back to that minimum fund balance target that the board established. As I was looking at what are reasonable expectations in terms of holding expenditures, I thought a 0% increase is unreasonable given the inflation that we're facing everywhere. But a 3% target still will require, I believe, in some of those years, us to make reductions, whether that's staff reductions or other reductions. We will have to make some sort of limit the amount of expenditure growth. And so there may be cases where some costs will go up, benefits may go up more than the 3%, which may cause us to have to do some contraction in other areas. But we have control of that. What we have less control of is the revenue growth. And I feel very comfortable with the 3% estimate for state funding and the 0% for federal funding. I think those are conservative, rational numbers. And the 3% expenditure growth gives us a real target. And I would say, unlike what we've used before, I think we have real numbers early on to start shooting for a year from now. And in other districts I've been in, I've been accused of talking about the next budget before I've even got this budget passed. But that is kind of the way I roll. Like once we got this document to a point where I felt comfortable with this year's budget, I'm already thinking about what is next year's budget, what kind of adjustments will we have to make, how can we start prepping ourselves and prepping staff and getting the system ready for both increases and decreases that we will have to make in the following year. That's the job that we have to do, and we have to start it 12 months ahead of time, not 2 months ahead of time.
I think that's a super important piece for the board and to make sure that we understand and to be able to communicate that to the community as well, because it's like a marathon and not a sprint over the next 4 years, and we don't have an immediate solution. This is the solution, and it's longer term than I think a lot of people want it to be, but it is what it is. So thank you.
I have a question. Thank you. So it's interesting. It's an interesting number here. So like with running start, 2021, 22 is 152, and then this current year is 159, and then we're budgeting for 135. Are we seeing less people going into running start that causes that drop?
I think we're hopeful that a lot of the programs that we are introducing at the high school will encourage students to stay with us rather than go to Running Start. We're not sure about that, but a change of 15 FTE isn't an unreasonable number. If we do see those 15 additional FTE go to Running Start, that will both increase the cost and increase, it will change the revenue structure slightly. We'll get the same amount of revenue. We'll have to forward some of that revenue out to Pierce College, most particularly. 15 students would represent about $150,000.
And then the dropout re-engagement enrollment, what is that? Is that just that we project less?
No, that's a program, you've thought about it as Pride Academy. So Pride Academy is a separate, it's called an open doors program, where dropouts are able to re-engage with the system, and the district receives separate funding. It's not really an ALE program, it's a dropout re-engagement program, and it's not designed to be a core component of our regular program. It is really designed to recapture dropouts from the system, and we expect that we'll have about on average, six students. What typically happens is we have very few students at the beginning of the year. Some students drop out, hopefully they don't, but if they do, we find ways to re-engage them, and we may have up to 12 by the end of the year. So the average of 6 FTE may look like 0 in September, 1 in October, and then we may have a lot in second semester as we re-engage dropouts. They may not always be our dropouts either.
Thank you.
Just for everybody's edification, all of our Running Start students, when they go to Pierce College, doesn't the college get like 93% of the apportionment, and we keep 7% or so for administrative bookkeeping, kind of?
Yes, I would say, I frame it a little differently. The 93% is exactly right.
Yes.
That is exactly the number. That 7% doesn't cover the academic support that the high school provides, because we still provide counseling support and those other, it doesn't cover administrative overhead. It really covers the academic support that continues to be provided to those Running Start students.
So if we had 10 more students decide that because higher ed at a four-year school is so expensive, they're going to choose Running Start, 10 more students could cause problems in our budget.
You could.
Also increasing the offerings of the college and the high school
Right.
here and things like that, so they can still get those credits.
Try to keep them here,
Yeah.
rather than get more of the FTEs. Okay, anyone have any other questions or comments for Mr. Lewis? At this time on the agenda, it says we should have comments from the audience regarding the public hearing on the budget. For everyone's edification, this is for information only, and the board will address adopting the budget next month. There's likely to be some fine tuning on the budget.
Old business days.
Oh, old business. Oh, you're right, sorry. I was thinking of last year. Mr. Bungard, you are listed for comments on the public hearing.
David Bungard, 2702 MacArthur Street, Yukon, Washington. Number 9A, whole business, approval of the budget for 2023-2024. If one of you board members during that discussion timeframe could ask a question, because we can't find this information. We can find some, but we'd like some actual information. What was the district administration budget in 2019, 2020? And what it is going to be in this budget, 2023, 2024? We'd like to know the feedback, everything said, cut district administration. But what it looks like, we've cut teachers, we've cut paraeducators, we've cut supplies, done the bare bones, and I understand that, you're right sizing to the funding. But the mission of the school is, it should be the students' needs. And the students need teachers. The teachers need paraeducators. Students, teachers, and paraeducators need supplies. And that's what's getting cut the most. Thank you.
Okay, it is now 6:47. So we'll return to our, we'll end the public hearing and return to the regular agenda and go to item 7, reports of budget status report. Mr. Lewis, you are back up.
Pierre Scott, members of the board, I'll try to make this a little quicker than the last presentation. This is your normal monthly financial update. You have a narrative document, just like every other month, and a summary chart along with all of the individual fund reports. In summary, we have finished up the school year, but we haven't finished up the fiscal year. What that means is for the school year portion, generally we are very close to finalizing our enrollment numbers. And so the enrollment that you have reported here is pretty close to the final that we will have. We'll have a few adjustments, but based on the revised budget that you adopted earlier this year, we're about 11 FTE short. And you can see in the chart that we dropped off a little more at the end of the year than we did in the previous 2 years, which is one of the reasons that when we got into May and June, that we made a decision in next year's budget document to lower our enrollment projection by 30 from the current year. So we're going to finish up actual average at 3,068 students, and next year's budget is 3031-ish. So hopefully we don't see that trend continue, but we did see a drop off at the end of the year. Our general fund balance at the end of the month was $939,303, again, very small. The expenses this month were $4.13 million. Our high expenses in a month are typically, could be as high as $4.5 million. We don't typically see that kind of level in the last 2 months of the year because we don't have expenses for transportation or food service. Those are paid earlier. So we believe the roughly $9 million of capacity that remains in the budget is sufficient to finish out the year. We think the revenue capacity looks pretty close. We're a little short in terms of collection, but we also haven't received our safety net funds yet. So we will be receiving those in August, along with, we typically receive the money for National Board teacher stipends in August as well in a lump sum. Those dollar values are relatively large in comparison to what we normally receive. So we feel like we continue to be pretty close to that 500,000 or a little more at the end of the fiscal year. But as I've said, like if there's one thing that makes me anxious, it's like where our fund balance level is. And if we get it's not unusual to get a $50,000 bill or a $60,000 bill, that a vendor forgot to send. If that happens and we weren't aware for some reason that exists, $50,000 when you're sitting on $5 million is okay. When you're sitting on $500,000, it becomes difficult. So I was expressing to Dr. Wade a few months ago, she asked me how I was feeling, which was nice of her. And I said, when I was just out of college, didn't have a lot of money, and woke up a lot of days with that feeling of trying to figure out, are we going to make it through the next month with rent and food and everything? And in the back of your mind, you're always trying to figure out, do I pay the rent bill today? Or do I pay the food bill today? Or when is the next payday? And for the last several months, and probably for the next several months moving forward because of our fund balance level, that is the type of feeling that I will be feeling on a month-to-month basis. And I'm hoping by the end of the 4-year outlook that no one has to be in this position where they are feeling that kind of anxiety. We always need to feel some anxiety. It should not be focused around our funding level. But all that to say, we look like we're going to finish in the positive territory, which is way better than we felt like we were going to be earlier in the year. And there's a real light at the end of the tunnel and a path forward here. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Mr. Lewis? Okay, the next item on the agenda is the board self-assessment results, which are part of the packet. And I just want to state for the record, annually the board does a standardized self-assessment developed and provided by WASDA. The self-assessment is each individual board member's perception of how the board performs in 5 standard areas. Each of those 5 standards has multiple discrete questions to provide the overall assessment. For example, standard 1 has some 19 questions. There's 70 questions overall in the survey. Each of the questions in all the standards can be answered on a 5 response scale of always, most of the time, some of the time, never, and don't know. In general, the summary chart, and if you look at the board packet and get to that and see the summary chart that rolls all the standards up, doesn't necessarily portray significant or radical changes from previous years, especially consider this year's assessment only had 4 respondents and previous years had 5. However, when you delve into the more specific questions within the standards, you can definitely see when individual board members have identified areas the board needs to focus on and improve. For example, in standard 1, we need to gain clarity on a clear and shared purpose. Also in standard 1, while the majority of the board is positive on delegating authority to the superintendent to manage district operations and implement policy, the majority also feels we do not always honor the roles and responsibility of the superintendent. This year's assessment has also identified a feeling of decline in treating all individuals, including fellow board members, staff, students, and community members, with respect, and the need for improvement in working with the superintendent to achieve mutual trust and commitment. Each of the standards and specific questions within each standard provides each of us the opportunity to reflect on the areas where we can improve as individual board members and the board as a whole. As each of us study these results, we'll look towards opportunities in the future to work together to improve our effectiveness as a board and board superintendent team. So these self-evaluations are very useful to us as we delve into the specifics so we can see specifically where we see a need to improve. Better. So, thank you.
Sure, yeah, the board self-assessment I think can be really, really important because research says if you have a dysfunctional board, you're gonna have a dysfunctional district, you're gonna lose your superintendent, and you're gonna lose staffing. And I think that this year has been incredibly unusual in that sense. And I've been actually, I mean, if I'm gonna be candid, I've been really disappointed and shocked at times by board behavior. And so my hope is that we can get some more clarity, that we can work more as a team, and that we can, I feel like there's been some subversion of the superintendent's role at times, and a lack of appreciation for administrative staff, for our teachers, for our paraeducators, and a lot of criticism, some of it completely unwarranted at times or redundant. And sometimes there is criticism that's warranted, but I think that we can do a better job, and my hope is that we do. So that's my goal at least. So, and I'm open also to, I think all of us are open to feedback from. I mean, I know it can be challenging sometimes or scary to approach the board as staff sometimes, but I mean, even if it's anonymous, I would love to get feedback on, you know, what I personally could do better, or what we could do as a board to become better and just make us more functional moving forward, so that's
Yeah, I always think these, the self-assessment is a really great way to kind of look at how we're functioning as a board, and so I'm constantly looking at like what our goals are, or what we do as a board, and there's 5 key factors that we are acting on behalf of the people of each community. The school board will fulfill the following functions. And I'm not going to read each description, but it's responsible governance, creating conditions for student and staff success, high expectations for student learning, accountability for student learning, and community engagement. So, and I always feel like we have done a retreat, or not, we did a retreat once to kind of talk, or just had some board discussion on kind of like what we want to focus on in the present year. And I know that there's been a lot going on in this year, so I don't know that we've had a chance to except focus on our budget. And one of the things too that I feel very passionate about in terms of the functions of the board, and I know I've mentioned it to you as well, is just looking at our strategic vision as a district. I know that has, I don't know the last time we did it, was it 2019 or 2018? Like, what was that process? Like, when that happens, because I don't know, because I came on in 2020. Oh.
We can address that.
Okay, so, but I do think it's really important that we engage the community, and improve on that function as well. And here's part of why that strategic vision is so important, is that the community, and that includes staff and students, are a part of, like, a lot has changed in our world since COVID. So since 5 years ago, our understanding of education, what the needs are of our students today are different. And I feel like we really need to collaborate, come together, and create a strategic and shared vision that we can all use as our focus point that informs everything else that we do. And so we have come up to the end of that in the end of this school year. And so I do think that I'd love to see us as a board do a strategic vision with the community, and I just don't know what that process looks like, and maybe that would come after a capital levy.
Okay, let's go to item number 8. Victor, did you have anything you'd like to contribute?
Oh, yes, I'll just add something real quick. I agree with everything LJ and Jen mentioned. And also just like to mention, prior to the current situation we're dealing with the budget, there were no issues in the school district money. And so something happened with the budget, and it's kind of like we're one big family. Something happened. Sean gave a great job of the plan ahead in the 4-year projections. And we should always remember that we still are a top school district. We still are a great community. And we just got to move forward as a community, as one big family, and just work together. And this all be behind us soon and very soon. And so I conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, let's move now to item 8, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Dr. Moore makes a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Director McDonald seconds. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Anyone opposed, nay? The consent agenda is approved. Okay, now, earlier than I remembered, moving to old business, approval of Resolution 911071923, budget adoption 2023-24 school year. Mr. Lewis.
Good evening, Chair Scott. This is the formal adoption of Resolution 911071923, which follows on the public hearing that you just had. Section 1 is a findings and determination section. Section 2 authorizes the levy collection of $9.6 million, along with appropriating the specific amount of funds in each one of the funds that we're allowed to spend. Section 3 is a fund transfer authorization, $275,000 from the general or from the debt service fund, and $450,000 from the general fund. Both of those are for principal and interest payments associated with non-voted debt. And then the balance of it gives the superintendent the authority to move forward, gives her the ability to direct me to do a whole bunch more work. We recommend your approval of this budget. Earlier in the budget hearing, you heard a question associated with central administration. I do not have readily available the 2019, 2020 budget documents to provide the comparison of dollar amounts and staffing levels at this time compared to next year. I can provide that to the speaker and to the board at a future time period. I will tell you that we have made significant administrative reductions in this budget compared to last year, and there are fewer administrators in the audience than there have been previously. So we've made a cut in both terms of staff and in terms of dollar value, and all portions of staff are feeling a little bit of the pinch associated with this budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 911071923, budget adoption 2023-2024 school year?
I move we approve resolution 911-07-19-23.
Director McDonald makes the motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Director Rohr seconds. Does anyone have any further questions for Mr. Lewis? Okay. All in favor of adopting Resolution 911071923, budget adoption 2023-2024 school year, please say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed, nay. The resolution is approved 4-0. Moving to item B in old business, Dr. White.
As the board requested at our April and May regular board meetings, the board had recommended we find an independent fiscal review, an independent source that could review what the district has done to see what happened with the budget situation. And as you know, we contacted our insurance pool provider, who researched our liability coverage and determined that our policy would cover that expense, which was a wonderful, wonderful surprise for us. So the expense was covered for the fiscal review done by an independent source. We were assigned counsel, the counsel assigned a fiscal investigator, and the investigator finished his investigation recently. The independent limited scope fiscal review is attached in the board packet. It will be, after this meeting, it will be posted on our financial services site for stakeholder review and transparency purposes. But based on the financial review, I'm quoting him because I've asked the board not to ask any questions because this is an independent review. You're welcome to discuss what was in his report, but the investigator found that he concurred with the district's conclusion that the review demonstrated no material fraud occurred within the business operations. So you're welcome to discuss amongst yourself, and this will become public as of tomorrow.
I actually have something I need to say after meeting with Mr. Brody as he began his independent review. When he asked me the question, at the board meeting, you adopted the budget extension. And the budget extension was higher than the budget you adopted. Didn't you see that you were adopting a budget that was lower than the budget you essentially just approved? And a light went on, and it's like, I didn't connect the dots. And I don't think anyone connected the dots on that.
Yeah, I don't know that typically is there,
I know, but
it's not, yeah.
It's not-
even something that we would even know to connect.
well, he did that because of his extensive background in finance and budget, and so now we can be more aware of making sure that if you're looking, because it should have prompted questions on our part, that why is this budget that's being proposed to us lower than the budget we're actually finishing the school year with, given we have inflation and all that other kind of stuff, which might have led staff to find errors that were made that weren't conditions found. So, I mean, to me, that just that interview was so helpful to me to realize what I didn't know about school finance organization. So when the report is published, I encourage everybody to read it. It's very enlightening, because there's some responsibility on my part. Didn't catch things, but I think we had gotten comfortable with how well things have been going in the past.
May I add one thing, Sam?
Sure.
I think
Talk to the microphone.
one of the things that I think we're hoping for with this fiscal review is, confirmation that the problems that we thought were the problems are the problems, which happened. But I think it was also to identify ways that we can, avoid this in the future, right? And change processes. And the things that he's recommended, in large part, unless I'm wrong, we've started to implement already, which I think is really good. Like, we were already directed to do that with Mr. Lewis and the things that he's brought to us. And I think that's really, really important. I think we've all gotten an incredible education this year in how to review budgets and finances and not have this happen again. And I think that in terms of the staff concerns that have happened with it too, I think that we are much more savvy about if we do end up hiring a new CFO in the future. I think we have better questions to ask and know kind of what to look out for. So that, I really appreciate that. So.
One of the things that in the interview that I had with the investigator was, he was talking, your board members are from the community, and he says most boards don't have that fiscal financial background, unless you're doing some steps, through WASDA and different opportunities to kind of grow that knowledge. And that's one of the things with board improvement too. That's one of our set out goals, is that we're constantly working to improve that. But ditto Jen on the confirmation that there is no fraud, and hopefully what happens is we can move forward. We can look positively into the next school year, and so thank you.
Okay, let's move to new business. Ms. Beauchene, item A.
I can almost reach the mic. Good evening. I first want to recognize an incredible partner for the district, which is Mary Hilton, if she could please stand, as our SEA president. We were in a room together for many hours. We had 4 sessions, and I'm pleased to provide to the board that the SEA members voted for ratification on July 12th after we reached tentative agreement on June 28th. Not a lot of major changes to the contract language, but one thing we identified and agreed on is we want to increase our collaboration, especially identifying training opportunities when it comes to issues that will help our students and their families, specifically around student behavior. So we'll be spending more time together before school starts to discuss that. I'm happy to answer any questions. The new agreement is attached for the board's review, and it's the superintendent's recommendation to approve this 2-year contract. And I'm excited to bring some good news to you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Is there a motion to approve the 2023-2025 Steilacoom Classified Education Association Collective Bargaining Agreement?
Make a motion to approve the 2023-2025 Steilacoom Classified Education Association Collective Bargaining Agreement.
Director Rohr makes a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion, questions for Ms. Boucher? Hearing none. All in favor of approving the 2023-2025 SCEA CBA, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Victor? All opposed, nay. Bargaining agreement is approved 4-0. Going to item B, the first reading of policy 2240, summer school.
Good evening, Chair Scott, members of the board. Policy 2240 and 6111, the next item that you'll be considering, really go hand in hand, and they're cleanup policies. So this should be fairly short for me. The summer school policy 2240, the major change is specifying that summer and non-regular school year programs are optional and not mandatory. And also the superintendent is authorized to determine what services are provided, including food services and transportation. This is often confusing for some families who move from other states, where when they offer summer school, they always offer transportation, they always offer food service, and that is not often, that's not always the case here. This should be as funding is available or when otherwise determined by the superintendent. So that is the significant change in policy 2240. We recommend your approval.
Is there a motion to approve policy 2240, summer school?
Will we approve policy 2240 summer school?
Director McDonald makes the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Director Rohr seconds. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Lewis on this?
I do have one question, and I don't know if it's actually related to this or if it would fall more in special education, but for students who, and the name of this process is escaping me, the students who need an extended school year services, right? Does that fall under the realm of summer school? Okay, that's separate, right?
It is separate. Where we provide ESY as part of basic education, we provide transportation.
Thank you. That was my question.
All in favor of approving policy 2240, summer school, please say aye.
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 Anyone opposed, nay. Policy 2240 is approved. Next is the policy 6111, tuition.
Yeah, policy 6111 goes hand in hand with 2240. 6111, the major change, first of all, the superintendent of public instruction no longer fixes the tuition rate. That's determined board by board, district by district. That's old language, as is the allowance for districts to charge tuition for full-day kindergarten. That was allowed when half-day kindergarten was mandated, but full-day was optional. Now that full-day is mandatory, we are not allowed to charge tuition. That is now eliminated, and the rest of it's just consistent language change with 2240, which you adopted earlier. Recommend your approval.
Is there a motion to approve policy 6111 on tuition?
I make a motion to approve.
Director Rohr makes the motion.
Second.
Director McDonald seconds. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Lewis? Hearing none, all in favor of approving policy 6111 tuition, please say aye. Aye. Thank you, Victor. Any opposed? Nay. Hearing none, the policy is approved 4-0. Moving to item D, resolution 912071923, capital levy. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Last month, you had an opportunity to discuss what a capital levy was, what it could be used for, and gave some direction to the superintendent associated with what you would want to see in a draft resolution coming back to you. We worked with legal counsel and developed really a several options of specific projects that could be included. They're included in a spreadsheet, both in the packet. Yeah, I think you all have them. These options all total $12 million each. That represents a 2-year capital levy, $6 million each year. The rate is based on assumed property values over the next 2 years. And the rates would be $1.09 and $1.06 respectively in 2024 and 2025. That ensures that the overall tax rate for public would not go up when you combine the maintenance operations, the EP&O levy with the capital levy. No homeowners should see an increase in the overall average rate district-wide. That $12 million, I have provided 3 options. You are not required to select any one of those. The idea here was to give you a sense of the projects that we consider to be emergent, necessary moving forward. Those include funding the land purchase at McNeil Street, Cherry Dale's HVAC system, school security and exterior lighting upgrades district-wide, the Steilacoom High School roof and building envelope, that is the exterior walls, ensuring that the building continues to remain dry and safe, so it needs to be repainted, sealed, caulked, roofing replaced, all of those, flashing, all of those things. It's incredibly expensive to do on a very large building like this. And then HVAC controls district-wide. Frankly, this doesn't cover all of the HVAC controls, but we can only do so many at a time anyway, so about $500,000 is the number that we could manage in a 2-year period. And then technology system improvements, that is really the upgrades to switches, routers, the underlying infrastructure of the district, and as well as upgrading to the normal hardware that has to be upgraded every 3 to 4 years, like Chromebooks. They are no longer supported after a certain amount of time. So this allows us to have a revenue source to replace that over the next 2 years. Those are the things that we considered emergent. They're included in all 3 of the options. Of course, the board would not have to include one of those items if they decided not to. The other ones are really mix and match items where some of them are related to future growth, some of them may be related to program changes, others would be necessary if we decided not to go out for a bond in the next 2 or 3 years. For instance, the HVAC at Chloe Clark probably works just fine for the next 3 years. Once we get out 3 years, we need to start putting, it will continue to work, just like the roof here will continue to work. But if we don't replace the roof, we're going to have to put a lot of money into funding normal repairs, because this roof will start leaking. The HVAC system at Chloe Clark will begin to go out on hot days and things like that. So that is why those are necessary if no bond issue is forthcoming. And the other couple items at the bottom were based on feedback that we received during the bond. A number of people indicated that they would like to see field turf on the baseball fields or additional field turf on other athletic facilities. So I included that just to give you a sense of what the dollar value would be on those types of projects if you decided to include that in a capital levy project. I'd encourage you to mix and match only to the extent that you stay within that $12 million figure. If you don't stay within the $12 million figure, then the overall dollar amount will be greater than that $1.09, $1.06, which may cause an increase to tax rates for taxpayers. Happy to answer any questions that you may have.
So do we ask for a motion and a second before we discuss options, or do we discuss options now?
You typically would, in a typical process, you would make a motion. In this case, because I know you are going to be potentially mixing and matching and determine exactly which, you should reach some sort of consensus about which projects, and then move an amended resolution to include the projects that you have identified. So I'd recommend that you discuss what projects you might want to include and then move forward on the motion on the resolution.
Because I have a lot of marks on my paper. When I look at things, like half of the future growth to me is kind of like I don't know that it's crisis. The stuff that's emergent, the crisis, to me that's not an issue. I think some of the future growth stuff can be an issue, and I think that the ones that are necessary of no bond, if we did it this way, then it gives us cushion to really reevaluate, reconnect, and restructure what a bond would look like. Because most of all this stuff would have been in the bond, which means we really do need to re-engage with the community to restructure what the follow-up bond would be once we accomplish these things. If that makes sense. So let's just look at option 1 first.
Before we do that, can I ask a wild card question? Okay. So I'm kind of looking at Director or Dr. Rodriguez back there because I'm wondering about certain things that we might be able to get grants for, possibly. For example, is there any opportunity to get a grant for turf or grants for technology system improvements, things like that? And what would that look like and how speedy could we get it? What's the feasibility for that? Maybe this is an unfair question.
In terms of DODEA grants, there are some limitations in terms of items above $5,000, equipment, construction items. So if we're like thinking about building a CTE wing, which I know we would all love to see, we can't construct things with that grant money. So there are a lot of limitations with the federal grants in that capacity. We certainly could not use it for turf.
Yeah. There's no private grants out there, or
I can't say that I've looked for turf grants. If that's something you wish me to do, I will certainly
I'm not directing you to do anything. I don't think, but it was just a question that came up. Like, are there other funding sources that we might be able to pull from or think about as a possibility, and then offset some of these? But it sounds like maybe, definitely not.
It's a really great idea. But one thing about grants is, and Lori's great at finding grants. She jumps right in. Usually, grants have a district component, so a match to put up the money, and it also involves a lot of staff time, which I'm sure Lori would do, but with our cuts in administrative support staff, it's going to be a little tricky next year to be searching and trying to find grants and then match money.
I've done a little searching for grants for turf. Typically, really, there are a number like NFL, in essentially the major league, the leagues have foundations and supports that can provide turf fields. They typically provide them to schools and districts that have much higher free and reduced lunch populations than we have. So in most cases, we would not qualify because our free and reduced lunch population or poverty populations aren't above 50%. Technology, similar, there are opportunities. There were a lot of opportunities 10 years ago and 15 years ago. There are fewer opportunities, but there are still opportunities with the big technology players. But sometimes that requires you to change the operating systems or the technology that you utilize. For instance, I bet we could get a grant from Apple with some matching funds, but we would have to change the type of technology that we have. So there are trade-offs that we make with the technology. There's nothing that I've seen on the technology side that's readily available that it would address the immediate needs. And I know that both Mark and Paul Harvey looked at that over the last couple years related to Chromebook replacements.
Thank you.
I think sometimes too, I've heard that you can find grants or funding related to lighting upgrades because you're changing the lighting fixture, so you're reducing your, increasing your efficiencies, also lowering your gas costs and so forth like that, so it's helping the system, so, but that would be a pursuit process, but.
Yeah, if I may, Shay Emery does an excellent job at pursuing all of those energy enhancement grants, and has done a great job for a number of years. So he pursues a number of those grants. We've been accepted to do many of those, and each one of these energy efficiency upgrades, we likely would approach Puget Sound Energy or one of the different utilities and apply for grants as part of that.
I'm going to suggest a methodology here as we go through here. Can we all just stipulate that everything is listed as emergent is needed?
Right.
So we don't need to go, and maybe just go down from that, draw a line there and go down and look at each one of those items. For instance, site work and parking at Steilacoom High School, which is listed in option 3, $2.2 million. This assumes a new stadium. But if a new stadium isn't in the bond, then have we, is it something we should be really planning for?
Not in an urgent.
Not in an urgent.
In our urgent needs of the district category, no.
So-
It's not like be the next criteria that we use, like is it contingent upon something else happening?
And the same for the turf.
Well, let's go to item by item. So could we just maybe just agree that that particular item is not something we'd want to include? So I'll just put a little X to the side here. Traffic revisions for Cherrydale, Chloe Clark, and Salters Point, $1 million listed in options 2 and 3. Granted, it's under future growth. I'm going to say the but. We know we have traffic problems at Chloe Clark. We know we have traffic problems at Cherrydale. We know we have traffic problems at Salters Point, and so we're going to have to address them sooner or later regardless. So, in my opinion, I think that line item should probably be addressed with the capital levy because we need to get that done regardless. So that one becomes a check mark. Set aside for modular classrooms. Those are wet modular classrooms, and at 500 grand for them, that's how many modulars would that be, Sean? 1, 2?
It's one double wide.
1 double wide. That could. Well, it's 2 classrooms, so it'd be like 50 students.
But it's a double wide, so you can't split that thing between schools.
So.
Okay.
You could also do 2 individual classrooms for about 500 grand. The site cost is the wild card. So you could split one classroom, but this essentially addresses an increase of 50 students where we think the growth will occur, and we think the growth will occur at Chloe Clark.
What is the timeline on that growth though? Because we're not projecting it in the next year, right? But what would you think in terms of?
Yeah, now, again, you're asking me to predict future growth of enrollment after I told you
I know.
I am uncomfortable projecting future growth of enrollment.
Yeah.
Right now, from a budget standpoint, we're projecting very conservatively and saying we're not growing. And at the same time, we have no capital resources. And if we grow, if for some reason the old Fort Lake property, old Fort property. Yeah, you all know the property that I'm referring to. If they begin doing multi-family construction there, and we begin seeing elementary school students, we will not have capacity in Chloe Clark to address a growth issue, and there's no capital funds in our current capital budget to address that. So this would set aside $500,000 if that growth happened 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. If we start seeing that construction, we have to start working with the city on locating that, pre-purchasing that.
What's the lead time for a modular?
6 months on the minimum, 6 months to get it constructed, and 3 months to install. So 9 months to.
And we're talking about a modular and not a portable. So a modular more like what we have at Salters.
What is the, I was gonna say, so, if we ran a bond again for a new elementary school, the timing on that would be,
I think what you're asking, so I'm gonna give you an example. If the board decided to put a bond before voters in the 2025 election cycle, it would pass. We would sell bonds, begin design. The new elementary school wouldn't be ready any earlier than the 27-28 school year.
Is the capacity at the Chloe Clark, like land-wise, is it maxed out for Chloe Clark expansion to meet the needs of future growth?
You're reading my mind, because we've had this discussion before in past years, and just whether it's Cherrydale or Chloe Clark or even Salters, I mean, just finding space to put another modular classroom. I mean, they're really kind of built out until unless you want to go out onto the play field, and then they're not close to the building. So it's really a challenge to try and actually site modulars or portables at Cherrydale or Chloe or Salters. We've kind of used up the land at Salters. We picked that place in the front by the parking lot.
Do you want me to address this? Why don't you go first?
Sam, years ago, you'll probably remember that we were not looking at modular classrooms. We were looking at, portables, and we could site it a double wide width bathroom at Chloe. During my time here, we've never looked at the Cherrydale site for modular classrooms, but there is capacity at Chloe Clark. What we were running into were some issues with trees and the rules around the preservation of trees. So possibly, I don't remember, but it wouldn't be an easy thing to do, but it could be done.
I'm very glad that you went first, Dr. Wade, because that was much more specific than the general answer I was going to give. I was just going to say, I've dealt with more constricted sites than the ones that we have here. Generally, if you are bursting at the seams in terms of student enrollment and you have no other options, the city really has they will work with you to address emergent, immediate needs to site portables. There always is some mitigation issues you have to go through, but these sites can accommodate additional classrooms. The things that you have to do to address that those things are sometimes challenging. So
that line item should stay in. Since we don't know when we're going to do a bond, and it would be at least, even if we passed one next year, it's still going to be 4 years before a new school's built. So.
And the school that has the greatest need would be Chloe Clark right now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
The next item is Anderson Island classroom, outdoor track and playground, and you plugged $1 million in there. To accommodate the reintegration of 4th and 5th graders, which I understand is like 6 kids for next year, 5 kids for next year. So to spend $650,000 to $700,000 on the classroom and then outdoor track and playground, and this is property we don't own. I mean, Anderson Island Parks actually owns the property, we maintain it and we take care of it.
Is that classroom, the idea for Anderson Island, would that also be like a modular classroom?
It would. The difference in cost for Anderson Island is
Huge.
it's transportation and site work. Those two things are much more significant on Anderson Island.
Just as to reinforce what you said, when we passed the 2005 bond, we had every project come in on time and at or under budget except one. And that was the multi-purpose building at Anderson Island, because Craig Mason, who was the principal and DLR associate, the architect, had failed to take into account the cost of ferrying all the equipment and supplies over the island, and how much longer and more expensive it is to get the construction people over there. And so if a regular building is constructed, let's say at $15 a square foot, it's closer to $25 a square foot to build a building, to put a building on Anderson Island, just because of the logistics of getting things there. So, $500,000 for a modular classroom for Chloe Clark versus $650,000 to $700,000 to essentially do the same thing in Anderson Island. That doesn't seem like an economically wise decision at this time, or economically wise option. What do you guys think?
I'm so torn on this, because if we do that program change, I mean, it's, how does it, I guess I just have questions about how it's gonna work. When I know some of the parents are saying, we have K through 8 with like one teacher, but that is just not feasible, the way that things
The
work.
parents are not teachers.
Right, it's like, but if we have K through 5 there, it's still the same kind of situation.
It is.
You can't have a kindergartner and a fifth grader in the same room.
Of course, how many of you actually went to elementary school in a multi-age classroom? Okay. Mine were 2 grades in one classroom, and the teacher split her time between, and that was back when you had 30 kids in the classroom, and all the desks were in straight rows and lines, and you got half the instruction. And so I just can't imagine putting 3 and 4 grades in one classroom and having one teacher and maybe a couple pairs, and the quality of the education just will not be there. It's not possible.
And the transition to middle school for those kids.
I mean, it's the socialization and the transition to middle school. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did the 4th and 5th graders off island anyway, because Sarah Campbell identifying that the Anderson Island kids, when they transitioned to 6th grade, were having some real adjustment challenges.
And I think too, like we really are listening to kind of what the community wants and is asking for, and it sounds like, just from getting some updates and briefings, that it's back in 2015, 16, 17, that it was a bunch of parents that came forward and said, we want to be at Salters. And so I think that the district is looking at ways to solve some problems and issues, you know, from transportation. Some of that is completely out of our control because the county runs our ferry system, and that's a completely different, that is something that's out of our control, and I know the district works and talks to the ferry administrator, but, you know, I think there's a way moving forward to have something where there could be some program success for their kids. And I know you've been listening, you have creative ideas in your team, and so, and then you look at too, like we have the future upcoming bond. You know, I will say just personally, I believe in neighborhood schools, especially for your elementary. And that's something that I think we all believe in. Like, we wanted to bring a bond that kept DuPont elementary kids in DuPont, kept Steilacoom elementary, and we want to do that for Anderson Island as well. The bond didn't pass. We tried to do it a second time And I think in the future, when we do run a bond, that's gonna be something that's on our priority list.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that's completely true. And when we did make the grade configuration change at Anderson Island, it didn't happen instantaneously. It was years and years of feedback and to do it right. I mean, you can make a decision and maybe make it work, but it took years for us to figure out the right way to do well for those babies. And so if transportation is now a concern, we're looking into that and trying to find ways to fine tune it. But the bond would have created some consistency in program where Steilacoom K-5 were in one place, DuPont and Anderson Island. It made sense for that planning, and it would have given us a little bit of time to make sure we do it in an effective, thoughtful way.
I think part of it too is if we're talking 5 4th and 5th graders, that doesn't mean they're going to stay on the island because they have choice. They could choose to go to Salters. That just doesn't seem economically a wise line item at this time. Okay. Save that for a bond, so we can really do it right on a bond. Okay. Now we're down to some of the necessary, if we don't run a bond right away, HVAC for Chloe. Let's do them one at a time.
Question for you, Sean. You said it has a good 3 years probably on the HVAC for Chloe. Does the spending have to happen within the 2-year period that we are collecting the funds? Or are you able to spend it in the future, a year later? How does that work?
That's an excellent question, and I probably should have covered some of the cash flow challenges. We collect this as property tax payments, so this $6 million each year would be, and I'm going to really round the numbers, about half of the first year would happen in April and half would happen in October. So you think about, we get $3 million in April, $3 million in October, $3 million the following April, $3 million the following October. So depending on which projects you select, we are not able to immediately, for instance, pay off the McNeil Island immediately, because we don't actually collect $4 million until we get to October. So the timing of when the money comes in isn't it's not like a bond where you sell the bonds and you have the access to the money immediately. You have access to the money as the property tax payments are paid. So this work wouldn't all get done within 2 years. Some of it would be done in year 3 after the second year collection had been made. And as you know, if the second year collection is in October, that's not necessarily optimal construction season. So one of these would be likely if you decided, for instance, the traffic revisions. We could easily do traffic revision studies early on, but the traffic revision projects themselves would probably be done in the summer following the second year, because we wouldn't want to do traffic revisions while school was in session. And there may be higher priority items that would happen prior to that, for instance, Cherrydale's HVAC, which would take precedence before we make traffic revisions. Does that make sense to you? So some of these would be done not in the 24 calendar year or the 25 calendar year, but the 26 summer.
So for the purchase of Neil, was that a 1 year or 2 year?
5 years.
It's a 5, okay, so we're good.
We are.
Okay, so what you're saying is when we get the money, we just have to make sure that we carefully account for how we spend it so that it can be mapped back to what our priorities were and why we asked the voters to support us with the capital level.
Yes, and I think once you have identified the specific projects that you want included, that makes it easier for Shay and I to schedule out which projects would be first, which are which could be accomplished the soonest, and we would have that information well in advance of needing to inform voters when they would likely see these projects done. I just couldn't do that in advance without knowing what the specific list is.
So I think, if I understand what you're saying, for instance, the HVAC at Chloe Clark is not as close to the end of its life cycle as the HVAC at Cherrydale. And that's a good thing, because while we'd say, well, we need to do that, in the list of priorities, it might be one of the latter things done. And by then, it would be at the end of its life cycle. So that would actually be good building preservation planning. Okay, so that makes it. And it's kind of like the Fram oil filter commercial, you know, pay me now or pay me later. So it's going to need to be done sooner or later.
And I was looking at facilities planning, and one of the things that should be considered is our facilities will meet and exceed all health, safety, and welfare regulations. And I know that's something that when our students are in the classrooms, and that we should have great filtration, you know, lighting, cooling, and all that should be completely available to them so that they can learn. So it is definitely one of probably the important need.
So HVAC for Chloe should stay in the mix. Since it's a longer lead item, would probably happen in year 2 or 3.
I think that takes us to 12, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't think so.
9.
Here's counting.
Because we have 1.5 with the traffic provisions in the modular classroom.
We're close.
If you were to look at that option 3, so far what I've heard is you've selected option 3 without the site work for Steilacoom High School.
So far.
So that means you have.
Actually, we've essentially selected option 2 so far.
Yes. So so you should have exactly 950. That's right. So
That would give us. Okay, so that's option 2. Okay, sorry. Thanks.
no, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of the things, if I may, just jump down to the last 2 items: turf the SHS football field, baseball, and fast pitch, and turf the middle school fields. Those are, to me, doing all those are definitely not a crisis priority. I mean, they just aren't. I mean, back in 2009-ish or 2010-ish or so, when we had known drainage problems at Pioneer at the football field, we spent another $60,000 to have, Green something was the name, and it's the company that puts in custom drainage that does all the PGA golf courses and stuff like that, and lots of parks. And the problem we have with the fields at Pioneer is they're overused. So they actually work quite well. So I'm not smiling on turfing middle school fields and adding turf to baseball fields and stuff, and fast pitch fields for the high school. But that, to me, is not, that's a nice to have, not a need to have. Does that make sense to everybody? But the other one is the turf in the high school football field. That's moving on to 10 years old. Yes, it is. So it's nearing the end of its. One of the unfortunate things, and you guys weren't on the board then, and I was, but when the community came to us as a board and said, we want to turf football field, either do it as part of the bond, or we'll get volunteers to come out and do it. Rusty, the construction manager, oh my God, you know, they just don't understand what it takes to put in a turf field. You're not going to get volunteers to do all the excavation and grading and stuff like that. We were really, the board was sold it as, you put it in, it's one and done, you don't have to worry about it, because nobody did the additional research to look at what is the life cycle of a turf field. And after it had been in for a while, we started seeing how it needed to be groomed, and had more infill had to be put in and so forth. We realized we need to start setting aside money, because this field's going to have to be replaced. And as we did the research, we realized that there's about a 10 to 12-year life for a turf field before it just needs to be replaced. So we're nearing that point. Because what happens, everything gets compacted, and you're actually going to cause more injuries to the athletes that are playing on it as the field gets old, because then it becomes like falling on concrete as opposed to tires. That's a long way of saying I think that the turf, the high school football field, would also probably be a 2-year out, because it's a long lead item to do that, and it would take an entire summer to do it. So that would probably be a summer of 26 project.
Yeah. I have not, as I said, without knowing the exact list, I didn't go through and determine which summer, or I can bring all of that information back to you, but it certainly wouldn't be right away.
But it would be, I think it would be a summer of 25 or summer of 26 project, and then it would be at the end of its life cycle.
That's right.
Does that make sense?
It does. Were you able to hear anything from Director Tinsley at all, just feedback on capital bond topic? Okay. And then Director Hogan, it's great to hear your voice back in meeting today, so.
Well, we have one thing left, and it's actually the least expensive thing in there, and that's the district, the lighting upgrades and stuff like that, and that's almost like a pocket change. Save money in the long run, right?
It will. It's a small dollar amount, but a high impact item for
So
classrooms.
it's a high return on investment.
Slight reduction in the cost,
Victor, you've been listening to all this. Do you have any comments you'd like to add to it?
I agree with all the comments. That I guess my only concern is I don't know the folks that asked now, like they've been, I guess, not heard or left out. But, I agree with everyone's comments on the funding and the priorities. I don't have any disagreements, but I just hope the folks in Anderson Island feel that we're not listening to them or not taking into consideration their concerns for expansion. But I agree with all the comments that everyone's made regarding the priorities for the budget.
Thank you. I think we need to really, to me, emphasize that if we're going to do the Anderson, we need to do it right. Provide the best quality that we can for them. Without a bond, we really can't do that. So with the list that you've given us, Sean, it looks like, for the most part, option 2 represents the best value for the things that we need. LJ and Jim, what do you think? All right, so a motion would be to adopt the capital levy with items in option 2 as the projects. Is that right, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, how I'm going to interpret that is approval of resolution 9/12/07/1923 amended with section 2B amended to reflect the specific projects identified in object 2. That level of specificity, if you say that's what you meant, we can make sure we have the resolution reflect, the final resolution reflect that interest.
All right, so is there a motion to approve resolution 9/12/07/1923 capital levy and amend section 2B to reflect the projects identified in option 2 of the 3 options provided to us? Have I captured that correctly? Okay. Is there a motion for that?
I make a motion to move resolution 9/12/07/1923 capital projects levy using the section 2, option 2, with projects in the package do you need me to read it to, okay.
Is there a second?
It's like,
Okay.
Can I make a really quick comment?
Yes, well, we're at that point, so motion's been made and seconded, so now, any comments?
One
What's
of-
your questions?
Well, one of the things I think that's really important is that we do maintain a consistent tax rate for our citizens, and this definitely accomplishes that, but it meets and addresses urgent, important needs for our students and our staff, and so that's why I will be supporting it.
Victor, do you have anything to add?
Yes, just a quick thing. Even though we don't have the funding to support any expansion at Ennis Valley at this point, I agree with the parents and their observation and needs for expansion, but just at this time we got other priorities we got to focus on, as we all agree as board members, and so that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, sir. Motion's been made and seconded to approve Resolution 91207-1923 capital levy as amended. Section 2B amended to reflect the projects identified in option 2. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The resolution is adopted. Sean, are those slides available? Okay, let's move on to we're trying to, it's a little bit of a science experiment.